These are questions that, if you drop them into that heavy, silent room we just described, they break the spell, they stop the rehashing of failure, and force the brain to literally switch gears.
Okay, so the mission for this deep dive is clear. We are going to give you these 3 questions, but we're also going to unpack why they work.
Welcome to Actualizing Success. In this podcast series, our in-house advisors discuss today's finance and technology topics with an emphasis on solutions that embrace tomorrow.
Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by putting you in a very specific room.
Okay.
A room I think every single person listening has been in at least once.
Yeah.
And probably once this week.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's a conference room or maybe a Zoom call, and the air is just heavy. Like physically heavy.
Not exactly a party atmosphere, I take it.
Definitely not. Something has gone wrong. A project deadline was missed. Maybe a client is furious, or the website crashed right during a major launch.
Right.
And the meeting starts, and almost immediately the room transforms into a courtroom. You can just feel the shift. The specific question hanging in the air isn't, how do we fix this? It's who did this?
Ah, yes, the blame game, the oldest game in town.
Exactly. Everyone is looking backward. They're dissecting the timeline. Why didn't we catch this in Q2? Or who signed off on the code? It's an autopsy, and you can just feel the energy leaving the bodies of everyone in that room. You're just completely stuck in the mud.
That is a very visceral description of a incredibly common phenomenon. In organizational psychology, and specifically in the text we're covering today, we call that the problem space.
The problem space. It sounds like a bad sci-fi movie.
It does.
But it feels like quicksand. So today, we are unpacking a really compelling guide titled, Let's Focus on the Solution. It's a manifesto, really, about how to drag a team out of that courtroom and into a construction site. It argues that we are almost addicted to dissecting the past at the expense of designing the future.
And addicted is absolutely the right word. What's fascinating about this source material is that it doesn't just say, hey, be positive. It acknowledges that getting stuck in the problem space is actually a default human setting.
Really?
Yeah, because it literally takes less caloric energy to blame someone than to invent a complex solution.
Well, that's thoroughly depressing.
It is a little depressing, but the good news is it's fixable. The guide provides a really tactical framework to shift leadership dynamics from reactive to proactive. And it does it through 3 specific, almost magical questions.
Magical is a pretty big promise.
Fair enough. Maybe transformative is a better word.
Yeah.
These are questions that, if you drop them into that heavy, silent room we just described, they break the spell, they stop the rehashing of failure, and force the brain to literally switch gears.
Okay, so the mission for this deep dive is clear. We are going to give you these 3 questions, but we're also going to unpack why they work. Because, frankly, when I first read them in the materials, I was a little skeptical.
Sure.
They just seemed way too simple to stop a full-blown corporate meltdown.
Simple is often deceptive, though. The mechanism here is about hijacking the brain's focus.
So let's start with the trap itself, the problem space. Why is it so incredibly hard to get out of it? The source mentions that dwelling on the problem drains energy, but isn't it kind of necessary?
How do you mean?
Well, if the boat is sinking, don't I need to know why there's a hole in the hull before I start bailing water?
Yes. But here is the critical nuance the source makes. There is a massive difference between understanding a root cause and wallowing in the fault. Think about it like a pilot. If a warning light flashes on the dashboard, the pilot needs to know what it means. That's root cause analysis.
Right.
But if the pilot just stares at the blinking light for 10 minutes screaming, "Who installed this defective bulb?"
The plane crashes.
The plane crashes.
That's cognitive tunneling, right? You get so fixated on the error signal that you completely lose situational awareness.
Precisely. The source argues that when a team is in the problem space, they're experiencing a form of shared cognitive tunneling. They are identifying culprits rather than solutions.
Which is useless in an emergency.
Exactly. And the text is very clear on this. You literally cannot be creative when you are defensive. If your brain is fully occupied with, how do I prove this wasn't my fault? You have 0 bandwidth left for how do we solve this?
So it's essentially a resource allocation issue. You're spending all your mental currency on defense.
Correct. The goal is to pivot. And the source argues you can't just will that pivot into existence. You can't just walk into the room and say, come on, guys, let's be solution-oriented.
Yeah, that usually just annoys people. It feels like toxic positivity.
It really does.
Just yelling, everything is fine, while the building burns down around you.
Exactly. You need a specific mechanism. You need a tool to force the pivot. And that's where the questions come in. These aren't just polite inquiries. They are strategic interruptions to the problem space loop.
Okay, let's get into the meat of it then. Question 1. And I have to be totally honest, when I saw this in the notes, I actually stopped reading. I thought it was a typo.
You're not the only one.
Because we're trying to get out of the negativity, right? We want solutions. But the first question the source suggests asking is, what risks do you see with this proposed solution?
It does sound completely counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It sounds like you're inviting the trolls in, you're finally getting some momentum, someone actually suggests a fix, and then the leader turns around and asks, okay, tell me why that's a terrible idea. Isn't that just dragging everyone right back into the problem space?
I can absolutely see why it feels that way. But let's look a little closer at the mechanics. This isn't about inviting negativity. It's about a concept called the premortem.
The premortem. Okay,
Yeah.
unpack that for us.
Sure. So a postmortem is an autopsy. The patient is already dead. Let's cut them open and see why.
Right.
A premortem is looking at a healthy patient, which in this case is the newly proposed solution, and asking, if this idea dies in 6 months, what killed it?
Oh, I see. So it's a simulation.
Exactly. It's a mental simulation.
Yeah.
And here's why this is actually a profoundly solution-oriented move, even if it sounds negative on the surface. When you are in a crisis, the very first solution proposed is almost always a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, it's a Band-Aid.
It's a Band-Aid. So by asking, what risks do you see? You aren't shooting the idea down. You are stress testing it before you commit resources to it.
So you're shifting the room from a courtroom where we determine guilt to an engineering lab where we test the structural integrity of the bridge before we drive heavy trucks over it.
That is the perfect analogy. And think about the underlying psychology of the people sitting in that room. If I'm the resident skeptic on the team,
Yeah.
and there is always a skeptic,
Always.
and you try to force positivity on me, I'm going to shut down immediately. I'm going to roll my eye and cross my arms.
Or you'll just smile, nod, wait until the meeting is over, and then complain to everyone at the coffee machine.
Exactly. The infamous meeting after the meeting.
The worst kind of meeting.
It really is.
Yeah.
But if you explicitly ask me, what risks do you see? You are actively inviting my skepticism into the process as a value add. You are telling me your critical eye is an asset here.
It's really clever, actually.
Yeah.
It weaponizes the pessimist. It takes their natural negativity and turns it into due diligence.
Proactive mitigation is the specific term the source uses for this. It transforms the team from victims of a crisis to architects of a strategy.
Architects, I like that.
You aren't just reacting to the fire anymore. You are designing a fireproof system. And that feeling, that psychological shift from victim to architect, is exactly what changes the heavy energy in the room.
It also deals with the blind spot factor the source mentions, because let's face it, the leader usually thinks their own idea is brilliant.
Right. Leaders very often suffer from optimism bias. They think, we'll just ship the quick code patch, it'll be fine.
But the team knows it won't be fine.
The team knows the actual risks, they know the servers are dusty, and the legacy code is basically spaghetti. If the leader doesn't explicitly ask for risks, the team won't tell them until the whole system breaks.
So question 1 is really about safety and vetting. It cleans the windshield so you can actually see where you're going.
Correct.
Now let's move to question 2, because this one feels like the engine of the whole process. The question is simply, what ideas do you have for moving forward?
This one seems incredibly basic at first glance, but it addresses a massive, pervasive dysfunction in modern teams. Passivity.
Oh man, I feel this one deeply. I have absolutely been that person.
We all have.
You're in a meeting, the boss is talking at length, and you just disconnect. You go into screensaver mode, you're just sitting there waiting for instructions.
That's called learned helplessness. It happens in organizations where decision-making is strictly top-down. You eventually stop trying to solve the problem because you assume the leader's just going to dictate the solution anyway.
Or worse, you're afraid to suggest something because if your idea is wrong, you get thrown right back into the courtroom.
Precisely. So when a leader intentionally pauses and asks the room, what ideas do you have for moving forward? They are doing something very specific. They are disarming the HIPPO.
The HIPPO, I assume we aren't talking about the zoo animal here.
No, it's an acronym, HIPPO. It stands for the highest paid person's opinion.
Ah, okay.
In most traditional meetings, the HIPPO dominates the space. Everyone anchors their thoughts to whatever the boss thinks. By explicitly asking the room for their ideas, the leader is signaling, I don't have the answer yet. I genuinely need yours.
So it's democratizing the problem-solving process.
Yes, and the source makes a very crucial point here. The best, most practical solutions almost always come from the people closest to the operational realities.
That makes total sense.
The CEO sees the 5-year strategy. The junior developer sees the actual glitch in line 40 of the code. If you don't ask the junior developer, you completely miss the reality of the situation.
There's another psychological layer here too, right? The source talks about psychological investment.
This is huge. It's what behavioral economists call the IKEA effect.
Oh, I love the IKEA effect. The idea that the slightly wobbly end table I built myself is inherently better than a solid oak table I bought just because I was the one who built it.
Exactly. You value it more because of your labor. If the boss just dictates the solution to the team feels zero ownership over it.
Right.
If the plan subsequently fails, they just shrug and say, well, management is stupid. But if the solution comes directly from the team, if it was their idea, they will fight tooth and nail to make it work.
Because it's a reflection on them now. They move from being passive bystanders to active participants.
They become co-conspirators in the solution. And that change in mindset is incredibly powerful. Suddenly, you don't have to push your team to work. They are pulling the project forward on their own because they want to prove themselves right.
Okay, so we've stress tested the initial ideas with question 1. We've ignited the team's agency with question 2. Now we come to question 3. And I have to step back into the skeptic role again here.
Bring it on.
Question 3 is, how can we do better next time?
What's your hesitation with that one?
It just feels fluffy.
Yeah.
It feels like something a consultant writes on a whiteboard during a corporate retreat and then immediately erases. Or worse, it feels like a trap. How can we do better? Sounds an awful lot like, what did you do wrong? Just dressed up in a nice tuxedo?
That is a very valid fear. If the company culture is already toxic, this question can absolutely be weaponized by a bad manager. But the source specifically frames this as future-focused inquiry.
Future-focused.
Right. The key is what you are actually asking about. You aren't asking, how could you do better next time, Bob? You are asking, how can we, the system, do better?
Ah, I see the distinction. So it's about the machine itself, not the operator.
Exactly. This is about institutionalizing learning. The source argues that most modern organizations suffer from profound amnesia.
What does that look like in practice?
They encounter a crisis, they heroically solve it, they high-five each other, and then 6 months later, the exact same crisis happens again because nobody bothered to change the underlying process.
Right. We put out the fire, but we didn't bother to fix the faulty wiring that caused it.
Question 3 forces you to fix the wiring. It demands structural, permanent fixes. You ask things like, do we need a new pre-flight checklist? Do we need better onboarding software? Do we need a stricter communication protocol?
So it takes the lesson out of people's individual heads and bakes it right into the organization's DNA.
Yes.
That makes perfect sense. It actually reminds me of how the commercial airline industry works. When a plane crashes or has a near miss, they don't just fire the pilot and move on.
No, they don't.
They completely redesign the physical switch in the cockpit so that specific human error literally cannot happen again.
That is the absolute gold standard of how can we do better next time.
Yeah.
It cultivates what we call a growth mindset. It clearly signals to the team that perfection isn't the expectation. Evolution is the expectation.
I really like that distinction. Perfection versus evolution. Because if I think you expect me to be perfect all the time, I'm going to actively hide my mistakes from you.
Of course you will. It's self-preservation.
But if I think you expect me to evolve, I'll openly share those mistakes so we can all learn from them.
And that completely removes the fear from the equation. The source is very clear on this point. Fear kills innovation. You cannot innovate if you are terrified of the professional consequences of failure. This question, how can we do better, replaces the fear of punishment with a relentless pursuit of excellence. It essentially turns a failure into neutral data.
Turns failure into data. I'm definitely stealing that line. Okay, so we have the 3-part toolkit.
Let's review them.
Number 1, what risks do you see? That's the premortem.
Yes.
Number 2, what ideas do you have? That's the hippie-o neutralizer.
That's the term.
And number 3, how can we do better next time? The evolution. So if we actually commit to this, if we stop the blame game and rigorously use these questions, what is the actual payoff? The source lists a few things. But what does it look like on a random Tuesday afternoon?
The first major payoff is speed. And I know that sounds slightly contradictory because we just consciously added 3 new questions to the meeting agenda.
Right. Asking deeper questions obviously takes more time up front.
It does.
Yeah.
But think about how much total time is wasted lingering in the problem space. Think about the endless circular arguments,
Yeah.
the long defensive monologues from people protecting their turf,
The passive-aggressive emails?
the emails written entirely to cover your ass.
Oh, the CYA emails. Entire corporate servers are full of them.
That is all pure organizational waste. The source argues that accelerated decision-making happens because you cut out all that emotional fat. You skip the interpersonal drama and go straight into the architecture phase.
So it's an investment.
Exactly. You might spend 10 extra minutes unpacking these questions, but you literally save 10 hours of downstream dysfunction.
And the second payoff is psychological safety, which we've touched on quite a bit.
Yes. When people feel genuinely safe to speak up about risks and pitch their own ideas, you get what the text calls unconventional ideas.
The out-of-the-box stuff.
Right. You get the slightly crazy suggestion from a junior staffer that actually ends up saving the company millions of dollars. You simply do not get that kind of input in a culture of fear.
And finally, there's empowerment, which I know sounds like a total corporate buzzword, but I think in this context it means something very specific and tangible.
It means agency. It means the team feels like they're actually driving the car, rather than just being locked in the trunk going along for the ride.
I love that image.
The source sums this entire philosophy up with a maxim I really appreciate. It says, problems demand attention. Solutions demand action.
Problems demand attention, solutions demand action. That's the bumper sticker for this whole deep dive.
It really is. It's so incredibly easy to give problems attention. It's seductive, honestly. It feels like you're doing real work when you sit around talking endlessly about the problem.
Because it's intellectually stimulating.
Exactly. But it's not work. It's wallowing. Action is the only thing that actually changes the reality of the situation.
I love it. It's a complete reframe of how we typically handle friction.
It absolutely is.
Now, before we wrap this up, I want to take a bit of a hard left turn here.
Okay.
We've been talking almost exclusively about corporate teams, software launches, pilots, and cockpits. But as we were talking through this, I couldn't help but think about how this framework applies a little closer to home.
You mean on a strictly personal level?
Yeah, I mean the internal monologue. Because if I'm being totally honest with you, the harshest courtroom I've ever been in is the one inside my own head.
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone relates to that.
Yeah.
The internal critic is the most ruthless prosecutor in the world.
Right. You mess something up, you spill coffee all over your laptop, or you skip the gym for a whole week, or you completely forget your partner's birthday. And immediately, what is your default reaction? You enter the personal problem space. You start interrogating yourself. Why am I so lazy? Why am I always so clumsy? I always ruin good things.
It's the ultimate identifying the culprit session.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the culprit is always you.
Always. So here is my final provocative thought and a challenge to the listener. And I'm going to genuinely try this myself too. Can we apply let's focus on the solution framework to our own self-talk?
That is a really fascinating experiment.
Yeah.
How do you think that would actually sound in practice?
Okay, so let's say I missed a major deadline for a personal goal, a fitness goal maybe. Instead of spiraling into, I'm a failure, I stop and ask question 1. What risks do I see in my immediate plan to fix this?
That's really good. That's essentially active self-coaching. You might realize, well, the risk is that I'm trying to catch up by working out for 3 hours tomorrow, which will just lead to an injury and I'll fail again.
Exactly. You treat yourself like a complex project to be managed rather than a criminal to be punished.
Right.
Then you move to question 2. What ideas do I have for moving forward? Not how do I punish myself for failing, but simply, what is the single next physical action I can take right now?
That immediately breaks the paralysis. It gets you out of bed and moving.
And finally, question 3. How can I do better next time? Not why am I fundamentally broken as a person, but looking at the mechanics. Maybe I need to set a louder alarm on my phone, or maybe I need to pack my gym bag the night before so there's no friction in the morning.
You're treating your personal life as a system to be optimized, rather than a character flaw to be constantly judged.
Treat your life as a system to be optimized, not a character flaw to be judged. That is the absolute mic drop right there.
It's just a much kinder way to live. And honestly, probably a significantly more effective one in the long run.
Absolutely. So there you have it. Whether you are leading a Fortune 500 company through a crisis or just trying to get through the week without beating yourself up, get out of the courtroom.
Walk into the construction site.
Ask the 3 questions: risks, ideas, and evolution.
That's the formula.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Try these questions out in your next meeting or even in your own head. We'll see you in the solution space. Catch you on the next one.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Actualizing Success. Make sure to visit us online at www.actualizeconsulting.com, where you can explore our service offerings. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred platform. If you've enjoyed what we talked about today, please consider leaving a review and following us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or would like to share your opinions with us, please send us a note at podcast@actualizeconsulting.com. We look forward to hearing from you.